Hi, I'm Jeff Steinmann, founder of Bravo Experts. I wanted to talk a little bit about a fear that I had that was an awful, gripping fear that I overcame. And first I'll give you a little bit of background. So ever since the age of, I think about 12, I have wanted to be an entrepreneur. I've wanted to have my own business. I've wanted to build a business. I wanted to call the shots, and I wanted to be able to design and build and create things and make them just the way I want them. And instead of pursuing that after high school, I went down the path that everybody tells you you're supposed to go down, right? So the path of going to school, getting good grades, and getting a good job that will take care of you for the rest of your life. And certainly I had a lot of struggles getting through college. It ended up taking me 13 years to get through college, basically because they were trying to teach me stuff that I didn't care about. I couldn't get into college. I couldn't get into the whole concept of learning stuff just for the sake of learning. It just didn't make any sense to me. I eventually did, after being academically dismissed once and bouncing back and forth to, I think, 7 different colleges, I did eventually get my bachelor's degree. Now, in the meantime, actually, before I got my bachelor's degree, I managed to get into a really good and have a very successful corporate career. So back in the late 90s, I started working in technology, and I started everything from end users to support to programming, network administration, but eventually ended up managing large technology projects for a couple of major banks. And I did that for a solid 10 years of my about 15-year technology career. And what happened over that time is, because I was doing a good job at what I was doing, I was getting good raises and I was moving up the ladder and ended up having a very good paying, successful job, and a lot of what I thought at the time was security that came with that. But about, I don't know, 5 or 6 years into my career going really well, everything really kind of fell apart for me in terms of my career, because I just at some point was completely drained of my passion for that job and for what I was doing. I found myself just completely and totally unfulfilled and not liking it, and just working my butt off trying to get something out of that corporate job that I just was not going to get from that corporate job. So, in that, I got really depressed over that. That was a really difficult part of my life because I just wasn't getting what I wanted out of life, and found that that corporate career that I had built just wasn't going to cut it for me. It wasn't what was going to make me truly happy. And I didn't really know what to do. So I guess kind of when I don't know what to do, I just start reading. So I started reading business books. I started reading tons and tons of business books. I have a shelf full of business books that I read during this period. And in fact, I even read a glossary of business terms one time. I don't even know why I did that. But I kept reading and reading just to kind of thinking, I guess it's going to spark some thought or something. But what happened was, it was reigniting my passion for entrepreneurship and reigniting my passion for having my own business and being able to make my own decisions and have control of my life and my day-to-day activities. And as it was igniting that, I was feeling more and more strongly the need to do this. I was realizing that if I was going to live a happy life, I was going to have to get out of this corporate career that I was in and pretty comfortable in and rather, frankly, dependent on. And I was going to have to become an entrepreneur. I was going to have to start my own business, which I'd always wanted to do. So what was happening, it was really scary. It was incredibly scary for me, because I had this corporate career that gave me the security that I wanted and needed, but I was also seeing that it wasn't going to work for me. and that I had to do something different. I was realizing that if I was going to be happy and live the life that I really wanted to live, I had to make this transition. And the transition scared the hell out of me. It was incredibly scary because I didn't know anything but getting a paycheck every 2 weeks. That was the only way of living that I knew. Now, I didn't live paycheck to paycheck. I've always been good at managing finances, but still, I still needed that money. And the more I read and the more my passion for entrepreneurship was ignited, the more I knew I had to do this, and the scarier and scarier and scarier it became. So, because I just kept thinking, well, what am I going to do? I'm going to quit my job, take a second mortgage on my house, and sink my life savings into a business, and then it may or may not work. Well, I mean, that was obviously very, very scary. And on top of that, I had grown accustomed to a lifestyle that allowed me to take vacations and buy, not everything I wanted, but a lot of things. So it was really scary to think about this. And I remember there was really 3 big turning points for me in conquering this fear. And the first one happened, I was laying in bed one night after I had been reading. And I think that what happened was I think I'd fallen asleep reading that night. And I woke back up, and I think the light was still on, if I remember correctly. And my mind was kind of racing with all this stuff. And I said to myself, I made this decision right there. I said, you know what? I don't know how I'm going to make this transition from working full-time to being an entrepreneur. But I do know that I'm going to figure it out. And I don't know how. I don't know how I'm going to figure it out, but I know that I'm going to figure it out. And that was a huge turning point for me, because I then started to think to myself, it's not if, it's when. And by telling myself and making really that decision that I was going to figure it out, I was going to make it work, I made that decision. And that really took a lot of the load off. It really made it less scary, because I knew in my head that I was going to find that way to make it work. I didn't know what that way was, but I knew that I was going to find it. So I just kept reading. I just kept reading and reading and reading and reading. And of course, eventually I came across the concept of information marketing. And that's what that means is making money with the knowledge that you have and the things that you know. And ultimately began to form a concept of a business in my head around information marketing and working with other people to make money from the knowledge in their heads as well. So I had this concept for this business that was forming in my head. And the beautiful thing about this business was that it had pretty low barriers to entry. I wasn't going to need to buy a building. I wasn't going to need to pay a big franchise fee or anything like that. So financially, it felt really doable. And it also felt like there were some things I could put in place while I was still working. So I moved forward with reading and educating myself about that, and I learned, it seems like just about everything there was to know about it. It certainly wasn't everything, because I still don't know everything. But as I was learning, the whole concept of this business was really coming together in my head. And I was really beginning to see the roadmap and how it was going to progress and how it was going to make money and how it was going to work. And it was, the idea was really maturing in my head. And I was bouncing this idea off of people and getting really good feedback. And people were telling me, yeah, this is a really good idea. It's really going to work. So I began to build some confidence there. But again, I'm still working full time. And one of the things I started doing was attending a lot of industry events. And I remember being at an event in somewhere, I think it was near San Francisco, and I was flying back from the event, back to St. Louis, and I was on the plane, and I'm always reading. So the book that happened to be at the top of the stack that I was reading at that point was The 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss, because it seemed to have, from what I'd heard, it had a lot of concepts that were applicable to what I was doing. So I'm reading the book, and I get to the sections towards the beginning where he actually has you write out your kind of some key points about your fears. Your fear of leaving your full-time job, which is exactly where I was. I was afraid of leaving my full-time job. So a couple of the questions that he has you answer are things like, what's the worst thing that could happen? What would you do to get back on track if that bad thing happened? What if you lost your job tomorrow? What would you do? And I don't normally do like the written exercises in books because they feel like homework, and it's kind of annoying, and I hate homework, so I just never do them. But for some reason, this is like one of the only ones that I've ever done. I actually wrote that out, and I still have the notebook that I wrote it in. But I wrote out my answers to those questions, and at that moment, I realized, wow, this isn't really that scary. I looked at kind of what are the worst things that could happen. And yeah, I mean, they suck, but they're not the end of the world. And especially when you look at it in the perspective of your entire life. You know, if I assume I'm going to spend about a minimum of 80 years on this planet, you know, that worst case scenario there happening somewhere in the middle just really isn't the end of the world. So it really helped to change the way I looked at things. And because as I was researching this business and I was building this concept, I was getting more and more excited and passionate about this business. So my mind was starting to shift to being more excited about the business and less fearful. But as I was reading that and doing that exercise from the 4-hour work week on the plane, it finally hit me. And I finally had enough confidence to make a true commitment to myself to take this step. And I don't know why. This was end of 2011. I don't know why I picked this date, but I decided right there on the plane that June 30th, 2012 was going to be the last date that I worked. That's when I was going to quit working my full-time job to pursue my business full-time. And making that decision was very powerful for me. I actually remember as soon as I got off the plane, the first thing I did was I sent a text to a friend of mine, and I said, you know what, this is the decision that I've made. I'm going to do this. And I think I even said something to the effect of, if I don't do it, please make fun of me a lot. So obviously he was very supportive, and that was really important. Sending that text was really important because it was like me committing to another person. And I would have to kind of admit this failure to another person if I didn't go through with it. And subsequently, I told a number of other people about this goal that I had, and that it was going to happen. And so I mean, I get off the plane, I go back to my normal life, and everything really shifts. My whole mentality shifts because it's no longer yeah, maybe this will happen someday. It's no, this is going to happen on June 30th. There's no more question about it. It was a whole new state of mind for me because it was now something that was real and tangible, and I was committed. And the thing that happened during that period after I made that date commitment was that I became more fearful of not meeting the date than I was of that worst case scenario that I had documented. And the worst case scenario is my house goes into foreclosure and I become homeless and all that. And obviously you need to talk through how would you actually deal with that. And there's actually good ways to deal with all those things. But I became more fearful of not meeting my date than I was of that worst case scenario. Now I'm not homeless, by the way. So that was a huge mind shift, and that's when the fear for me really started to melt away. And then the third biggest shift in that whole scenario happened on April 2nd, April 2nd, 2012, prior to June 30th, 2012. And that was when I had, bear in mind, I was working a full-time job and I was trying to get this business off the ground at the same time. So I was a very, very busy man, and I was very stressed out and had a lot of things going on in my life. And I came home from work on this particular Monday, April 2nd, and I was just a ball of stress. I was just absolutely nuts that day. And I think we all have those days. I think some people have more of those days than other people. But anyway, I was having one of those days and came home, and I just decided I just couldn't deal with doing any work. I had a bunch of work for my business that I needed to do. And I decided I just needed to take some time and just kind of gather my thoughts. So I went in the backyard and I built a fire, and in a little fire pit that I have. And I sat down and I just kind of started thinking and reflecting on where I was and how I felt and, what's going on. I mean, and then I started thinking, am I going to make it another 3 months? Because at that point I had 3 more months until my date. And as I got to thinking, I realized that I couldn't come up with a good reason to keep working until June 30th. And I guess long story short, I made the decision right there, sitting by my fire, that I was going to resign the very next day. And the very next day, which was April 3rd, I put in my 2 weeks notice, and April 13th was my last day working full time. And ever since then, I've been focusing solely on building out my business, and just amazing things are happening. And it's been the best decision I've ever made. I mean, my mind has just totally changed. And the really cool thing that happened is after I made that leap, and after I left my full-time job, I found that I wasn't really afraid anymore, because I had already done it. I had made that leap. I had done that thing that I was so afraid of doing. It's just all about facing your fears. But I think really the biggest thing that made me less fearful was when, or I should say that made me actually make the decision and face my fear actually 3 months early, was that I became more afraid of not pursuing what I wanted to pursue than I was of the negative consequences of it. And that by far is what allowed me to get past that fear. And that really is how I conquered what is probably the biggest fear that I ever faced in my life.